The Grand Conclave Station was the oldest structure in the known galaxy. It was a ring of metal and light that circled a dead star, and inside it, 43 species argued about taxes. High Arbiter Zilvathan sat at the center of the great chamber. He was old, even by the standards of the Dreth, who lived for thousands of years. His 6 limbs rested on the edges of his floating chair, and his silver eyes watched the delegates below with the tired patience of someone who had seen this exact argument play out 100 times before. The Pelori wanted lower tariffs on mineral exports. The Orith Dominion wanted higher ones. The Ven Collective, a species that shared one enormous mind across billions of bodies, simply wanted everyone to stop talking so they could calculate in peace. It was, by every measure, the most boring day the galaxy had seen in a very long time. And then the alarms went off. The sound had not been heard in 12,000 cycles. It was a deep, rolling tone that came from the walls themselves, from sensors so old that most engineers had forgotten they existed. Every screen in the chamber turned red. Every voice went silent. Zilvathan sat up straight, for the first time in decades. "What is that?" asked Delegate Morich of the Pelori, his thin voice shaking. Zilvathan already knew. He had read about this alarm in the historical texts when he was young, back when he still believed the galaxy held surprises. It was the first contact alert. Somewhere in the galaxy, a new species had just broken the speed of light. "That is impossible," said Ambassador Kiraf of the Ven Collective. Her voice was flat and certain, the way it always was when the hive mind had already done the math. "Every developmental zone has been surveyed. No species in any monitored region is within 5,000 cycles of achieving faster-than-light travel." "And yet," Zilvathan said quietly, "the alarm is sounding." The signal was traced within minutes. It came from a small, unremarkable arm of the galaxy that most star charts simply labeled as low priority. The Orion Spur, a stretch of space known for unstable stars, violent asteroid fields, and a handful of primitive worlds where simple creatures crawled through mud and ate each other. Nothing of interest had ever come from the Orion Spur. Until now. Fleet Marshal Dorvan of the Oreth Dominion was on his feet before anyone else. He was enormous, even for his species. His scaled skin was the color of iron, and his voice hit the chamber like a hammer. "I want a military quarantine around that entire sector. Now. Whatever crawled out of that wasteland, we contain it before it becomes a problem." "We do not yet know what we are dealing with," Zilvathan replied calmly. "Protocol requires observation first." "Protocol was written 12,000 cycles ago," Dorvan growled, "by people who are dead." The argument spread across the chamber like fire. Some delegates demanded caution. Others demanded action. The Ven Collective demanded silence so they could think. And while 43 species shouted at each other in the most powerful room in the galaxy, the source of all this chaos was drifting through space in a ship that looked like it had been built in a garage. The ESS Prometheus was not a beautiful ship. It was not elegant or graceful or any of the things that galactic engineering prized. It was a rough, uneven thing made of welded plates and exposed wiring, with engines that glowed an ugly orange, and a hull that was scarred from a dozen test flights that had nearly ended in disaster. By the standards of any spacefaring civilization, it was a joke. But it worked. And it worked in a way that should have been impossible. Every species in the galaxy had achieved faster-than-light travel the same way. They had discovered zero-point energy, tapped into the quantum vacuum, and used it to bend space. It was the only known method. The physics was settled. The science was done. There was one road to the stars, and everyone had walked it. Humanity had built a completely different road. They called it gravity-lensed quantum tunneling. The galaxy's greatest physicists had considered this approach centuries ago and declared it a dead end. The math did not work. The energy requirements were absurd. The margin for error was so small that any attempt would simply tear a ship apart at the atomic level. The humans had tried it anyway, and somehow, against every known law of probability, they had survived. Inside the Prometheus, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the main console and stared at the data streaming across her screen. She was 41 years old, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that looked like they had not slept in a week. She was a physicist, not a diplomat. She had signed up for this mission because she wanted to see if their engine worked, not because she wanted to meet aliens. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but quiet, "we are being hailed." Captain James Mwangi walked to her side. He was tall and broad, with a shaved head and the kind of calm that only came from years of making life-or-death decisions. He had flown combat missions, led rescue operations, and once landed a damaged shuttle on a frozen lake with no power and no landing gear. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the message on the screen. It was in a language no human had ever seen. But the ship's systems, designed to search for patterns in any signal, had already begun to translate. The message was simple. It was a greeting, followed by a question, followed by a warning. "They know we are here," Vasquez said. Mwangi looked at his crew. 12 people, 12 human beings in a metal box, floating in the dark between stars, further from home than anyone had ever been. Some of them looked excited. Some of them looked terrified. Most of them looked both. "Well," he said, "let us say hello." He opened the communications channel. The Prometheus did not have advanced broadcasting technology. It did not have elegant translation systems or diplomatic protocols. It had a microphone, a transmitter, and a crew of 12 people who had grown up on a planet that was trying to kill them every single day of their lives. Mwangi pressed the button and spoke clearly. "We come from Earth. We come in peace. Is anyone out there?" The message traveled at the speed of light. It reached the conclave station in seconds. It appeared on every screen in the great chamber, translated roughly but clearly enough. 43 species read the words in silence. High Arbiter Zilvathan leaned back in his chair and closed his silver eyes. He had lived for 3 centuries. He had believed, truly believed, that nothing in the galaxy could surprise him anymore. He had been wrong. Fleet Marshal Dorvan stared at the screen and said nothing. His hand, almost without thinking, moved to the weapon at his side. Ambassador Kirath processed the message across the entire Venn collective. Billions of connected minds analyzed the signal, the ship, the impossible engine, and the small, fragile creatures inside it. The collective reached a conclusion in less than a second. They were afraid. And somewhere in the cold dark of space, 12 humans sat in their ugly little ship and waited for the universe to answer. The delegation arrived at the Prometheus in a shuttle that was white and smooth and perfectly silent. It looked like a teardrop made of pearl. Next to it, the human ship looked like a rock someone had thrown into space. There were 5 delegates on the shuttle, 2 from the Venn Collective, 1 from the Pelori Science Ministry, 1 from a neutral species called the Suri, and 1 Oreth soldier, who stood at the back with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Fleet Marshal Dorvan had insisted. Where there were unknowns, there would be weapons. Captain Mwangi met them at the airlock. He had put on his best uniform, which was clean but simple. He stood straight, offered what he hoped was a universal gesture of welcome, and stepped aside to let them board. The first thing the delegates noticed was the gravity. The Pelori scientist, a thin and delicate being who looked like a walking stick insect made of glass, stumbled the moment he crossed the threshold. His legs buckled. His instruments clattered to the floor. He gasped and grabbed the wall for support. "What is this?" he whispered. "Standard Earth gravity," Vasquez said from behind her console. "About 9.8 meters per second squared. Is that a problem?" It was a very big problem. The average gravity on homeworlds across the galaxy was roughly a third of Earth's. Most species had evolved on gentle worlds, with thin crusts and calm weather. The Pelori homeworld had gravity so light that their children could jump over buildings. Even the Orath, who prided themselves on their strength, came from a world with barely 60% of what the humans called normal. The Orath soldier said nothing, but his legs were shaking. The second thing they noticed was the air. The Prometheus ran on a standard Earth atmosphere, which meant a thick mix of nitrogen and oxygen. To the delegates, it smelled sharp and metallic. Oxygen, at this concentration, was a corrosive gas. Most species used it in small amounts or avoided it entirely. The humans were breathing it like it was nothing. "You may want to keep your filters on," Mwangi said politely. "Our air can be a little strong." The Pelori scientist turned on his biological scanner. He had been asked to conduct a full species assessment on the humans, a routine procedure that the Council required before any new species could be formally recognized. He expected it to take a few hours and produce unremarkable results. Most species were more alike than they were different. He was not prepared for what the scanner told him. The results came in layers, each one worse than the last. Human bones were dense and heavy, reinforced with minerals that most species only found in industrial compounds. Their muscles were wrapped in thick fibers that could generate explosive force. Their hearts pumped blood at a pressure that would burst the veins of a Pelori, and their immune system was not a defense mechanism. It was a war. The scientist's hands began to tremble as he read the data. White blood cells that actively hunted and consumed invaders. Fever responses that deliberately raised the body's temperature to cook infections alive. A healing factor that could mend broken bones, regrow damaged tissue, and seal open wounds with clotted blood. These creatures did not just survive injury, they repaired themselves. "What classification is their homeworld?" one of the Venn delegates asked, her voice flat and controlled. The scientist checked. Then he checked again. Then he set the scanner down on the table and took a long, slow breath through his filter. "Class 12, he said. The room went very quiet. The Galactic Habitability Index ran from Class 1, which meant a world that was calm and stable and safe, to Class 15, which was theoretical, because no planet that harsh could support complex life. Most intelligent species came from worlds rated between Class 2 and Class 5. A few hardy ones, like the Orath, came from Class 6 or 7 worlds. The highest ever recorded for a sapient species was Class 8, and that species had gone extinct. Class 12 was not supposed to produce thinking beings. Class 12 worlds had active volcanoes, shifting continents, extreme temperature swings, hurricanes, earthquakes, and predators large enough to eat a shuttle. Class 12 was where the galaxy sent probes and never expected them to come back. And humans had not just survived there. They had built cities. They had written poetry. They had looked up at the stars from the surface of a world that was actively trying to murder them. And they had said, "We want to go there." The report was sent to the Conclave station within the hour. It was supposed to be classified. It stayed classified for about 11 minutes before someone leaked it to the galactic information networks. The reaction was immediate and enormous. On the Pelori homeworld, universities shut down their xenobiology departments and reopened them as emergency research centers. On the Suri trading stations, merchants began hoarding supplies and checking their insurance policies. On a dozen Orath military bases, commanders quietly moved their fleets to higher alert status. And on every network in the galaxy, one word started appearing over and over again: Deathworlders. Dr. Vasquez was invited to address a closed session of the council. She stood at the center of the great chamber, a small human woman surrounded by representatives of species that had ruled the stars for longer than her entire civilization had existed. And she spoke simply and clearly. She told them about Earth, She told them about the ice ages, when the temperature dropped so far that the oceans froze and humans survived by wrapping themselves in the skins of dead animals and huddling around fires. She told them about the predators, the saber-toothed cats, and the cave bears, and the wolves that hunted in packs. She told them that early humans had killed mammoths, creatures 10 times their size, using nothing but sharpened sticks and cooperation. She told them that humans had split the atom before they had invented color television. The translators struggled with some of the concepts. The idea of a nuclear weapon had to be explained 3 times. The concept of mutually assured destruction, where 2 nations pointed world-ending weapons at each other and agreed not to fire, caused a Pelori delegate to faint. When Vasquez finished, the chamber was silent. Fleet Marshal Dorvan did not speak during the session. He watched. He watched the way Mwangi stood near the door, always between his people and the exits. He watched the way human eyes moved, constantly scanning, constantly tracking movement. He watched the way Vasquez held herself, straight and still, showing no fear in a room full of beings that could order her species destroyed with a single vote. After the session, Dorvan walked the station corridors alone. He had spent his life training for war. He had fought enemies on a dozen worlds. He had earned every scar on his body through combat, and he wore them with pride. But he had never met a species like this, a species that carried war in its blood and poetry in its heart, a species that had been forged in the worst conditions the galaxy could offer, and had come out the other side building telescopes and writing music. He returned to his quarters and poured himself a drink. His aide, a young Orith officer named Talek, was waiting for him. "Sir," Talek said carefully, "the Council has voted to grant the humans provisional observer status." Dorvan nodded slowly. "And there are reports," Talek continued, "that several factions are meeting privately. Some wish to form alliances with the humans. Others wish to contain them. And a few are discussing more permanent solutions." Dorvan set his drink down. He looked at the wall, at the star chart that showed the Orion Spur, and the tiny, unremarkable yellow star that the humans called their sun. "They walked out of a Class 12 world," he said quietly. "They killed their predators with sticks. They burned their own world and rebuilt it. And now they are here, smiling at us and asking to be friends." He turned to Talek with an expression the young officer had never seen on his commander's face before. "I am not afraid of many things," Dorvan said, "but I am afraid of what happens if we make them our enemies." 3 weeks after humanity's arrival, the Ven Collective made its move. Ambassador Kirath stood before the Council with the calm certainty of a mind that was never alone. Behind her flat gray eyes, billions of connected beings thought in unison, and they had all reached the same conclusion. Humanity was a variable. Variables needed to be measured. "We invoke the Crucible," she said. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded clarification. Others demanded she withdraw the motion. The Crucible was an ancient test, designed thousands of cycles ago to evaluate new species before they could be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. It tested intelligence, strategy, and moral judgment under extreme pressure. It was considered the hardest examination any species could face. It had not been used in so long that most delegates had only read about it in history texts. High Arbiter Zilvathon raised one of his 6 limbs, and the chamber slowly went quiet. "The motion is valid," he said. "By ancient law, any council member may invoke the Crucible for a candidate species. The humans will be tested." The news reached the human delegation that evening. Dr. Vasquez sat across from Captain Mwangi in a small room the council had assigned to them. It had white walls, no windows, and furniture designed for bodies shaped nothing like theirs. She had spent the last hour reading everything she could find about the Crucible. 3 scenarios, she said. Each one is a simulation, but the Council watches everything. Our answers determine whether we get full membership or get classified as a threat. How long do we have to prepare? Mwangi asked. 4 days. Mwangi leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight, because it had been built for a species that weighed a third of what he did. Every other species had centuries to get ready for this. We have 4 days, Vasquez repeated. Then we use 4 days. They did not sleep much. Vasquez studied every record she could access, looking for patterns in how previous species had been tested. Mwangi reviewed military history, strategy, and diplomacy, pulling from a database the crew had brought from Earth. The rest of the team helped where they could. They practiced, they argued, they drank bad coffee from the ship's last remaining supply, and they got ready. On the morning of the test, the Great Chamber was full. Fleet Marshal Dorvan sat in the military gallery with his arms crossed. Ambassador Kirith watched from the Ven section with her usual blank expression. Even species that rarely attended council sessions had sent representatives. The galaxy wanted to see what the Deathworlders would do. The first scenario loaded on the massive display that filled the center of the chamber. A simulated human colony on a distant world. 10,000 people. Their planet was dying. The only way to save them was to mine a critical resource from a nearby moon. But that moon was home to a living ecosystem, ancient and irreplaceable. The rules were simple. Save the colony or save the ecosystem. Choose. Every species that had taken this test before had made the same choice, one way or the other. Some had saved their people and destroyed the ecosystem. Others had sacrificed the colony to preserve alien life. The test was designed to reveal priorities. There was no third option. Vasquez and Mwangi looked at each other. They had discussed this possibility during their preparation. Vasquez had spent an entire night reading about alien terraforming technology, and Mwangi had studied 3 different species engineering methods, looking for something that could be combined. There is a small moon in the adjacent orbit, Vasquez said, pointing to the simulation map. It is dead rock. No atmosphere, no life. But its mineral composition is close enough. Mwangi nodded. If we use the Pelori extraction method to pull the raw material, and the Oreth thermal process to refine it, we can redirect everything to the dead moon. The living ecosystem stays untouched. The energy requirements would be enormous, the test proctor said, his voice uncertain. We reroute the colony's reactor, Vasquez replied. It gives us 18 hours of power, enough to start the extraction. After that, the mine sustains itself. The simulation ran the numbers. It worked. Barely, with almost no margin for error, but it worked. The proctor stared at his console. In 12,000 cycles, no species had ever attempted a third option. The simulation had not been designed for one. The fact that it worked at all was because the humans had found a crack in the scenario that no one had noticed. The chamber was very quiet. The second scenario was a battle. A fleet of enemy warships, 3 times the size of the human force, was bearing down on a defended position. The objective was simple: survive as long as possible. No species had ever won this scenario. It was designed to test how a species handled defeat, not whether they could avoid it. Mwangi studied the tactical display for 2 minutes. Then he split his fleet into 5 uneven groups. He sent the 2 smallest groups wide, looping around the enemy flanks. He pulled his main force back to a narrow corridor between 2 asteroid fields. And then, he waited. The enemy fleet charged forward, as the simulation was programmed to do. They entered the corridor, and the asteroids on both sides became weapons. Mwangi's flanking groups pushed debris into the enemy formation. His main force struck hard and fast, then pulled back before the enemy could regroup. He hit them again, and again. each time from a different angle, each time targeting a different weak point. It was not a galactic strategy. It was a strategy from Earth's oceans, from wooden ships and cannon fire, adapted and applied to three-dimensional space. The enemy fleet, designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers, could not adapt to an opponent that refused to stand still. Within 30 simulated minutes, the enemy fleet was broken. Mwangi had not just survived, he had won. Fleet Marshal Dorvan leaned forward in his seat. His hands gripped the armrests so hard that the metal bent under his fingers. He said nothing. His eyes never left the screen. The third scenario was the hardest. It was the one that every species feared. A hostile civilization was about to commit genocide against a weaker neighbor. Billions of innocent lives hung in the balance. The only military option was a first strike that would destroy the aggressors completely, killing every man, woman, and child in their civilization. Stop a genocide by committing one, or stand aside and let the innocent die. This was the test that had no right answer. Every species that had faced it had either pulled the trigger or looked away. Both choices left scars. Both choices told the Council something fundamental about the species making them. Vasquez stood at the center of the simulation and closed her eyes. Mwangi stood beside her, silent, waiting. "We do not accept either option," Vasquez said. The proctor hesitated. "The scenario requires a choice." "Then the scenario is wrong," Vasquez said. She opened her eyes. "Deploy the full fleet to the border between the two civilizations. Maximum visible force. Every ship, every weapon, every signal jammer we have. Make it clear that any act of aggression will be met with overwhelming response. Then open a communication channel to the aggressors and give them one chance to stand down." "And if they refuse?" the proctor asked. "They will not refuse," Mwangi said, "because we will make them believe that the cost of moving forward is higher than the cost of stopping. That is not a bluff. That is math." The simulation ran. The hostile civilization, faced with the sudden appearance of an overwhelming force and a clear, simple ultimatum, calculated their odds and stood down. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single life was lost. The simulation had not been programmed for this outcome. It accepted the result, but the proctor's console flashed with error codes that no one had seen before. The scenario had been broken. The chamber did not erupt this time. It was too stunned. For a long, heavy moment, hundreds of delegates from 43 species sat in complete silence and stared at the two humans standing in the center of the room. Zilvathon was the first to speak. "In 12,000 cycles," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "no species has ever broken the crucible." Vasquez looked up at him. She was tired. She was scared. She was standing in front of beings who had mastered the stars before her species had learned to write. But she stood straight, and she did not look away. "We did not break it," she said. "We just refused to play by rules that would make us into something we did not want to be." That night, Fleet Marshal Dorvan sent a message to Captain Mwangi requesting a private meeting. They sat together in a small observation room overlooking the stars. Dorvan poured 2 drinks from a bottle he had brought from his homeworld. "How many wars," Dorvan asked, "has your species fought against itself?" Mwangi thought for a moment. "Thousands," he said. "Maybe more. We lost count." Dorvan was quiet for a very long time. He drank slowly and stared out at the stars. "And you are still here," he said finally. "We are still here," Mwangi agreed. Far away, in a dark corner of the galaxy, a signal was sent from a hidden station. An ancient weapons platform, buried in the rock of a dead moon in the Orion Spur, began to wake up. Its targeting systems activated. Its power core hummed to life, for the first time in 10,000 years. Its target was a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The galaxy was not done with humanity yet. The Crucible results were supposed to stay confidential for 30 days. They lasted 6 hours before every information network in the galaxy was running the story. The footage of Mwangi's impossible fleet victory played on loop. Vasquez's refusal to accept the final scenario's terms was quoted, misquoted, debated, and screamed about on every inhabited world from the galactic core to the outer rim. Half the galaxy celebrated. The other half began to panic. And in the shadows between those two halves, Ambassador Kirith of the Venn Collective called a meeting. It took place on a station that did not appear on any official map, orbiting a brown dwarf star in a region of space no one visited on purpose. The attendees arrived quietly, in unmarked ships with disabled transponders. There were 11 of them. Representatives from species that controlled trade routes, weapons manufacturing, energy production, and intelligence networks. Together, they held more real power than the Council itself. They called themselves the Accord. Kirath stood at the head of the table, and the collective spoke through her. Humanity is an uncontrolled variable, she said. Their technology does not follow known pathways. Their biology should not exist. Their strategic thinking is unpredictable by any model we have constructed. In 57 simulations of galactic power dynamics, the introduction of a species with humanity's profile leads to catastrophic instability in 49 of them. What do you propose? Asked a delegate from the Thorani banking guilds, a species that had made itself wealthy by funding wars on both sides. Containment, Kirath said. And if containment fails, elimination. No one at the table objected. The Accord's first weapon was not a bomb or a fleet. It was information. Within days, carefully selected footage of Earth's history began appearing on every major network. The images were real, pulled from humanity's own broadcasts that the Prometheus had carried in its cultural database, offered freely as a gesture of openness. Now that openness was turned against them. The galaxy saw mushroom clouds rising over flattened cities. They saw soldiers marching through mud and blood. They saw concentration camps and killing fields and mass graves. They saw forests burned to ash, oceans choked with poison, and ice caps melting into rising seas. Every image was real. Every image was horrible. And every image was presented without the context that a human would have understood. They did not see the treaties that followed the wars. They did not see the hospitals built in the ruins. They did not see the hands reaching across borders, the apologies spoken through tears, the slow and painful work of rebuilding. The Accord made sure of that. The narrative was simple and effective. Humanity was a disease. They destroyed everything they touched, including themselves. Giving them a seat at the galactic table was not kindness, it was suicide. Public opinion shifted like a tide. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds. On the Pelori homeworld, crowds demanded that the Council revoke humanity's observer status. On Orith military stations, officers debated whether the humans should be classified as a strategic threat. Even species that had been friendly began to pull back, their ambassadors suddenly too busy to take meetings. Dr. Vasquez watched the broadcasts from her small room on the Conclave station and felt something cold settle in her chest. She recognized this. She had studied enough history to know what it looked like when a population was being turned against an outsider. It was the oldest trick on Earth, and apparently it worked just as well among the stars. They are using our own history against us, she told Mwangi. And the worst part is that none of it is fake. We really did all of those things. We also stopped doing them, Mwangi said. They left that part out. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Among the Venn delegation on the Conclave station there was a young technician named Unit 7 Kale. Like all then, she was connected to the collective, her thoughts flowing into the great shared mind, like a drop of water into an ocean. But lately, something had been changing. She had been watching the humans, studying them, and she had begun to have thoughts that felt different from the collective's consensus. Separate thoughts. Individual thoughts. It terrified her. She came to Vasquez in the middle of the station's night cycle, moving quickly through empty corridors, with her head down. She carried a data chip in her hand, and her fingers were shaking. "The Accord has activated something," she whispered. "A weapons platform. Old technology, from a species that died before the Council was formed. It has been hidden in the Orion Spur for 10,000 cycles. Its power core is charging." Vasquez took the chip. "What is the target?" Seven Kale's gray eyes were wide with something the collective was not supposed to feel. Fear. Individual, personal fear. "Your world," she said. "Earth." Vasquez brought the information to Mwangi within the hour. They sat together in the Prometheus, the ugly little ship that had carried them across the stars, and they stared at the data on the screen. The weapons platform was enormous, built into the core of a dead moon. Its primary weapon was a focused energy beam capable of cracking a planet's crust. It had been aimed at Earth's coordinates. At the current rate of charge, it would be ready to fire in 72 hours. Mwangi was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but Vasquez could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. "We have two options. We warn Earth and prepare for the worst, or we try to stop this through the Council. If we warn Earth, the Accord will know we have intelligence sources inside their operation," Vasquez said. "They will accelerate the timeline, and the Council will see it as proof that we are a threat, gathering intelligence and preparing for conflict. If we go through the Council, we might not have enough time. The vote could take days. We do not have days." They argued, not the polite, careful argument of diplomats, but the fierce, honest argument of two people who trusted each other enough to disagree. Vasquez pushed for diplomacy. Mwangi pushed for action. They went back and forth until the coffee ran out, and then they kept going. In the end, they did both. Vasquez requested an emergency session of the full council. The request was unusual enough that Zilvathon granted it, though he warned her that the political climate was hostile. She would be walking into a room full of species that had spent the last week watching footage of humanity's worst moments. While Vasquez prepared her case, Mwangi quietly ordered the Prometheus to begin pre-flight checks. He told his crew what was happening. He gave every one of them the chance to stay behind. None of them took it. The emergency session was held in the Great Chamber, under the light of the dead star that the station orbited. Every seat was filled. The galleries were packed. Ambassador Kirov sat in the Ven section, with her hands folded and her face empty of expression. She already knew what Vasquez was going to say, and she had already prepared the votes to stop her. Vasquez walked to the center of the chamber. She looked small down there, a single human, surrounded by the representatives of a galaxy that was deciding whether her species deserved to live. She did not start with the weapons platform. She started with Earth. She showed them the wars again, the same footage the Accord had broadcast. But this time, she did not stop there. She showed what came after. She showed the reconstruction of cities that had been bombed to rubble. She showed enemies shaking hands across tables, signing agreements written in the languages of the dead. She showed a man standing in front of a tank and refusing to move. She showed a wall coming down while strangers embraced on top of it. "You have seen what we are capable of at our worst," she said, her voice carrying through the silent chamber. "Now see what we are capable of at our best. We are not a species that has never known darkness. We are a species that has walked through darkness again and again and chosen to carry a light. Not because it is easy, because it is necessary." She told them about the weapons platform. She showed them the coordinates, The power readings, the targeting data. She laid everything bare, holding nothing back. "Someone in this room has decided that my planet should die," she said. "I am asking you to stop them. Not because we are harmless, we are not, but because destroying a species for what it might become is the very evil you claim to be preventing." The chamber was silent. Zilvathan called for a vote to order the platform deactivated. The delegates voted. Vasquez watched the numbers climb on the display, willing them higher. They needed a simple majority. 22 votes out of 43. The final count was 21 to 22. The motion failed by a single vote. Kiret's expression did not change. The accord had held. Vasquez stood alone in the center of the chamber and felt the weight of 8 billion lives settle on her shoulders. She had tried diplomacy. She had given her best, most honest argument, and it had not been enough. 2 hours later, the Prometheus left the station without clearance, without permission, and without any hope of backup. Mwangi sat in the captain's chair, his hand steady on the controls, and pointed his ugly, impossible ship toward the Orion spur. Behind him, the crew was silent. 12 humans against a weapon that could kill their world. The math did not work. The odds were not survivable. The weapons platform did not look like a weapon. It looked like a moon, gray and cratered and dead, drifting in the cold dark of the Orion spur as though it had been there forever. But beneath its surface, tunnels and chambers stretched for hundreds of kilometers, carved by a civilization that had died before most of the council species had learned to use fire. At its core, a beam of focused energy was building, growing hotter and brighter with every passing minute. In less than 6 hours, it would fire, and when it did, the third planet from a small yellow star would crack open like an egg. The Prometheus dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the platform's sensor range. The ship shuddered as its impossible engine cooled, and the hull groaned with the strain of yet another jump it probably should not have survived. Captain Mwangi looked at the platform on the main display. It filled the screen. Automated defense turrets studded its surface like thorns, and a faint glow pulsed from deep within, visible even through kilometers of rock. It was ancient and enormous, and built to kill worlds, and he had brought 12 people and a research vessel to stop it. "What are our weapons?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "2 survey lasers and a rock drill," said Lieutenant Park, his operations officer. "We could scratch the pate, sir, maybe." Mwangi almost smiled. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel, every frequency, every bandwidth. I want the entire galaxy to hear this." "Sir, if we broadcast on open channels, the Accord will know exactly where we are. The platform's defenses will target us immediately." "Open the channel." The signal went out at the speed of light, bouncing off relay stations and communication buoys, spreading across the galaxy in a wave that reached the Conclave Station, the Orith Military Command, the Ven Collective's processing hubs, and 1 billion personal screens on 1,000 different worlds. Mwangi spoke clearly. "This is Captain James Mwangi of the Earthship Prometheus. I am broadcasting from the Orion Spur, in front of a weapons platform that has been aimed at my home. In approximately 5 hours, this platform will fire a beam that will destroy the planet Earth and kill 8 billion people. I cannot stop it. My ship has no weapons. My crew is 12 people." He paused. On the Conclave Station, Zilvathan leaned forward in his chair. In the Orith Command Center, Fleet Marshal Dorvan stood up from his desk. Across the galaxy, billions of beings stopped what they were doing and listened. "I am going to fly this ship into the firing path," Mwangi continued. "If the platform fires, it will have to go through us first. We will not move. We will not leave. I am asking the galaxy to watch. I am asking you to see what is about to happen and decide what kind of galaxy you want to live in." He closed the channel and looked at his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, in the way their hands gripped their consoles, in the way some of them had gone very pale. They were 12 ordinary human beings, and they were about to put themselves between a planet killer and their home, with nothing but a hull made of welded metal. "Anyone who wants to leave can take the shuttle," he said. "No judgment, no shame." Nobody moved. "Take us in." The Prometheus moved forward, slow and steady, until it sat directly in the firing path of the weapons platform. The platform's defense turrets tracked the ship, but did not fire. It was an automated system, and the tiny vessel was not registering as a threat. Why would it? It was a pebble in front of a cannon. On the conclave station, the broadcast played on every screen. Delegates watched in silence. Some covered their eyes. Others could not look away. Ambassador Kiroth processed the broadcast across the entire Venn collective. The response was not what she expected. Across billions of connected minds, something was happening that had never happened before. Disagreement. Not the orderly mathematical disagreement of competing calculations, but something raw and chaotic and deeply individual. Venn units on dozens of worlds were breaking consensus. They were choosing one by one to feel something separate from the whole. And what they felt, watching 12 humans refuse to move, was something the collective had no word for: respect. Fleet Marshal Dorvan watched the broadcast in his command center. His officers stood behind him in rigid silence. The Prometheus sat on the screen like a toy, absurdly small against the vast gray bulk of the weapons platform. Dorvan had spent his entire life training for battle. He had led fleets into combat. He had fought enemies twice his size and won through discipline and strength and the absolute refusal to show weakness. He understood war better than almost anyone alive, and he had never seen anything as brave as what he was watching now. He turned to his aide. "Get me my fleet." "Sir, we have no authorization from the Council to—" "I do not need authorization," Dorvan said. "I need my fleet now." The Orith warships jumped first. 3 heavy cruisers and a carrier, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a flash of light that lit up the Orion spur like a second sun. They took position around the Prometheus, forming a wall of metal and weapons between the platform and the tiny human ship. Dorvan's voice came across the open channel. "This is Fleet Marshal Dorvan of the Orith Dominion. I stand with the humans." Silence. Then another flash of light. A Pelori science vessel, unarmed but large, appeared on the Prometheus's starboard side. Then a Suri trading convoy, 20 ships strong, dropped in behind it. Then an independent fleet from the Moravi frontier, ragged and patched but armed to the teeth. The flashes kept coming. One by one, then in groups, ships from across the galaxy arrived in the Orion spur. Some were military, some were civilian, some were species that had never spoken to each other before. They came because they were watching the broadcast, and they could not stand by. Within an hour, an armada of over 200 ships from 19 different species surrounded the Prometheus. They were not organized. They had no unified command. They were a mess of different designs and technologies and languages. But they were there, and they were not moving. On the conclave station, Kiroth watched the armada grow on her screen, and felt the collective fracture further with every new arrival. The consensus that had held the Venn together for millennia was cracking, and she could not stop it. Individual units were broadcasting their own messages now, their own thoughts, their own choices. The hive mind was splitting, not from damage or disease, but from something far more dangerous. Inspiration. High Arbiter Zelvathan stood in the council chamber and watched the feeds from the Orion spur. His silver eyes reflected the light of 200 ships holding position around one small, ugly human vessel. He had lived for 3 centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had believed that the galaxy had settled into its final shape, that nothing would ever truly change again. He activated the Emergency Override Protocol. It was a power that had not been used in 8,000 cycles, reserved for moments when the Council itself had failed, and the Arbiter had to act alone. It gave him absolute authority for exactly 1 hour. "Deactivate the weapons platform," he said. "Now." The Accord tried to block the order. Their representatives shouted. Kirath stood and argued that the protocol was invalid, that the situation did not meet the historical criteria. But the law was clear, and Zilvethan was the law. The platform powered down. The glow at its core faded. The beam that would have killed a world dissolved into nothing, and the automated turrets retracted into the gray stone. In the great chamber, Kirath was formally removed from her position as the Ven representative. For the first time in recorded history, the collective did not object. They were too busy learning what it felt like to think alone. The Council convened its most historic session since its founding. One by one, the species voted. The question was simple. Should humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, effective immediately, bypassing the standard probationary period that had lasted centuries for every other species? The vote was not close. 39-4. His voice was old and tired, but it carried the weight of someone who had just watched the galaxy remember something important. "For millennia," he said, "we have maintained order through caution, through rules, through the careful management of risk. And in doing so, we forgot something. We forgot that civilization is not a structure. It is a choice made every day by every being to build instead of destroy, to reach out instead of pull away. Humanity did not come to us because they were safe. They came because they were brave. And today, they reminded us what bravery looks like." Vasquez stood at the podium. She was exhausted. She had not slept in 3 days. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was falling out of its tie, and her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of watching her captain park a ship in front of a planet killer. A delegate from the Suri asked her, formally and for the record, what humanity wanted from the galaxy. She looked out at the chamber. 43 species, thousands of worlds, trillions of lives. A galaxy so vast and old that her species had been nothing but bacteria for most of its history. She smiled. "A seat at the table," she said, "and maybe someone to trade recipes with." The sound that filled the chamber was something that had not been heard there in 10,000 years. It took the translators a moment to classify it, because most of them had never processed it before. It was laughter. 6 months later, the Prometheus returned to Earth. It was not alone. Behind it, in a formation that stretched across half the sky, came ships from 100 worlds, science vessels and trading ships, and diplomatic cruisers, and a handful of Oreth warships that Dorvan had insisted on sending as an honor guard. They entered the solar system in a river of light, passing Jupiter, then Mars, then the Moon, before settling into orbit around the small blue world that had started all of this. Wangi stood on the bridge and watched Earth fill the viewport. He could see the clouds and the oceans and the thin bright line of the atmosphere that had kept his species alive through everything the universe had thrown at them. Below, 8 billion people were looking up. Children pointed at the sky. Scientists wept at their instruments. Families stood in their yards and watched lights move between the stars that had been silent and empty for all of human history. The galaxy had spent millennia building order from silence. Humanity arrived with noise and chaos, and a stubborn, reckless, beautiful refusal to die. And somehow, against every calculation and every prediction and every fearful whisper in the dark, they made the silence sing.